today we focus on women and how South Africa's G20 presidency is using its platform to push for real change. We look at the Women's Empowerment Working Group and the W20 dedicated to gender equality and women's economic empowerment as they mark 30 years since the Beijing Platform for Action and 10 years of W20 engagement. We'll be speaking to Advocate Joyce, Maluleke and UN Women's Mofokeng on three urgent priorities: financial inclusion, the care economy and ending gender-based violence. The question now is whether the momentum we see at the G20 can be sustained and whether it will finally tip the scales towards a truly equal future. Now, across the world, women's rights and opportunities have been hard fought for and in many cases hard won. But for millions of women, especially on the African continent, equality remains out of reach. From the burden of unpaid care work to barriers in financial access and the ever-present threat of gender-based violence, the challenges are both systemic and urgent. Joining us now is SABC News specialist researcher Zinzi to unpack this further for us. And of course, Zinzi, a very good afternoon to you. I mean, when you track and look at just the working group of women empowerment, there's also the W20. I want you to speak a little bit about both and perhaps just take us through as we, start our conversation on just the key priorities during these discussions.
Well, Nati, the Empowerment of Women's Working Group has been championing the issues around a woman as empowerment and gender. And they've been leading the cause in terms of the G20 women.
Yeah.
They're the ones who have been leading the technical meetings, which are engagements that have been happening since the beginning of the year. There's been 3 technical meetings that have happened so far. And there's another one coming up in October where they'll be discussing some of the issues that have come up from the past 3 engagements that they've had, and that's when they will also make declarations and the policies that we'll be seeing. The W20 side is more on civil society. They've been supporting the EWWG.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. And I mean, when we focus and we delve deeper in just some of those key priorities, speak to us then about the milestones, because we do know, of course, that this particular presidency comes after a number of milestones, both for the Empowerment Working Group as well as the W20, especially when we start speaking about declarations that were made a couple of years ago.
Yes. So the Beijing Declaration and Platform Action was a landmark action document that was advancing women's rights and gender equalities, and it had like 12 critical focus areas looking at poverty, looking at women's empowerment. It actually connects with some of the key priorities that the the empowerment of women's working group is looking at. These are the ones that we saw in the previous slides. I don't know if you can go back there. This is your financial inclusion, care economy, and gender-based violence. Unati, I just want to quickly just say that women are often left out of our economy. We've seen like the latest labor quarterly stats that showed that young women and majority young women are not in employment. This is 37% of young women which are between the ages of 15 and 24, and women between the ages of 15 and 34. 48% of those are outside of the economy. And black women mostly bear the brunt of this. So this is why it's important to tackle this. Then there's the care economy. The care economy looks at the jobs that we actually overlook. This is domestic work and the work that women do at home, cooking, cleaning, and doing all these things. Women actually, majority of their time is taken by these things that are seen as mundane, that should be actually be paid for, and it keeps the economy actually going. And then there's gender-based violence, which has been plaguing our country.
Absolutely.
I mean, last year's stats alone showed us that over 5,000 women in South Africa were murdered, and over 60,000 women have experienced assault GBH. That's glaring, and it actually highlights the importance of the work that's going to be done at G20 by the women.
And I mean, just, hearing you say this, particularly around the stats and how it is especially black women who bear the brunt when we speak about those things, it will be interesting to know and to see how far South Africa, and I'm looking forward to that woman panel that we'll have a little bit later on, how far some of just these declarations that have already been tabled at the 1995 Beijing Declaration, for one, have been championed, and what ultimately that declaration will be when the Leaders Summit takes place in November. But I know you've been also looking at other things and delving deeper into this. And in fact, we'll play that for our viewers. Thank you so much, Zinzi, for that. That was SABC News specialist researcher, Zinzi Mani. So as South Africa then prepares to host the G20 Summit, various engagements, as Zinzi has been saying, are happening to highlight issues pertaining to women's equality as well as empowerment. So SA's G20 presidency is an important chance then for women's economic and care policies to be tackled and prioritized. Let's look at this package.
Opening market access for women is definitely not a rocket science. It is just a will. As we host the G20 and lead various groups, we must ensure that women are not watching from the sideline. They must be at the center.
These were the words of Minister of Women, Children and Persons with Disabilities, Sindisiwe Chikunga, at the National Women's Day celebrations in Limpopo. As South Africa prepares to welcome global leaders for the G20 summit, Chikunga said the event must reflect the country's commitment to gender equality. The G20's key priorities for women's empowerment under South Africa's presidency are focused on financial inclusion, the care economy, and gender-based violence. The G20's second Empowerment of Women's Working Group meeting was held earlier this year in Sun City in the Northwest Province. Its focus was women's economic empowerment and financial inclusion. One of the research tabled at the meeting indicated that women across the globe struggle to get funding for their businesses.
There is an unspoken divide and rule globally. So white women may get a little bit more credit than black women. European women may get a little bit more credit than Asian women. More banking resources and so on. But the common thread globally is that it is harder for women to get loans, to be trusted with loans. It is harder for women to get into the economic levers of their countries.
Meanwhile, paid care work remains critical for women's empowerment. This emerged at the G20's Commission of the Status of Women, held in the UN in March.
Policies related to paid care work need to be strengthened so that women can enjoy the same benefit and rights as men in the workplace.
There was also general consensus that gender equality can no longer be business as usual, and the G20 must be a key driver.
Women are dying, and it's preventable. And it's linked to the economy, including to the war economy, where $4.3 trillion is spent on military expenditure, when 119 million girls are out of school.
At the end of South Africa's G20 cycle, there's hope that there will be solid policy commitments for women's empowerment.
We hope that we will achieve a strong communique for our ministerial in October. And as with South Africa, we are closing the first G20 cycle on it. It would be a strong signal if we finish the first G20 cycle with a powerful commitment to women's empowerment and gender equality.
Zinzi Swamani, SABC News, Johannesburg.
All right, so let's unpack all of this. Under its presidency, then, the G20's Empowerment of Women Working Group is tackling 3 core priorities: recognizing the value of care work, opening doors to financial inclusion, and ending gender-based violence and femicide. Today, we unpack what this means for women in South Africa, Africa, and beyond, and how these efforts can drive lasting equality. I mean, to help us unpack further, we're now joined by Advocate Joyce Maluleke, Director General at the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, and Technical Lead for the G20 Empowerment Women Working Group, as well as UN Women South Africa's Program Analyst, Neo Mofokeng. Ladies, very good afternoon to you and welcome to you both. Thank you so much for your time. This is an important discussion. It also happens at a time when South Africa is honoring and marking Women's Month. I want to start with you, Advocate. Help us understand what some of these discussions and these working groups are hoping to achieve. Because when you look, this year marks 30 years since that declaration was made in Beijing. And it is important then to see, as we mark the Leaders' Summit, what declarations will come out of it. Just help us place where these discussions are at.
Good afternoon to you and to the listeners. I think you started it correctly in terms of linking it to Beijing plus 30.
Yeah.
Where are we? How far have we moved? Have we achieved some of those commitments that are there?
Yeah.
Hence, our theme focuses on care work, because we know South Africa is a diverse country. You have paid maternity leave in government. You have paid maternity leave in some few private sector companies, and most women do not have paid maternity leave, and some don't even have enough time for the maternity leave. Some claim from their UIF. Even though as a country, when you look at us, we say we do have policies, but they are not applicable to everyone. So that is part of the care work, because then women have to stay at home to care for the children for 4 months or for a week or whatever. It also differs, because in some companies, you go for a day or 2 days, you deliver, you come back, and all those things. Those are some of the things that are discussed there. But not only that, care work includes many things. Those young girls who won't go to school simply because they have to look after an older person who's sick at home. Government must take the responsibilities, the responsibility of government.
And we'll go into those details. But now perhaps let me bring you into this conversation. So you, the program analyst for UN Women South Africa, and essentially you've been providing then that technical expertise and data for the Empowerment of Women Working Group. Just help us understand, just from your expertise and the kind of indicators that you were looking at in terms of women's empowerment and some of your concerns in terms of the gap. What are we seeing there in terms of those numbers?
Yes, thank you very much, and afternoon to the viewers at home. So just perhaps to preface that UN Women participates as an invited international organization, and upon the request of the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, we do provide technical advisory role, and this is because a lot of the key priority areas that have been mentioned within the Empowerment of Women Working Group are areas which we work in as UN Women. Chief to those is on the care economy, particularly looking at paid and unpaid care work. So as part of our advisory role, we have been sharing some of the best practices through our work. And we are aware that the South African government is intending on developing a national strategy for the care economy. And so we've shared some best practices that we've seen from some of our country offices, such as Kenya, and what really needs to go into that care strategy, which we refer to it as the 5R, which is recognize, redistribute, reward, and recognizing. So this really speaks to also ensuring that the care work is valued within the country's national GDP, and ensuring that it accounts for the economic growth of the respective member states within the G20.
I'm glad you mentioned Kenya, because we also want to, delve into the other parts of the African continent. What are some of the countries that are lagging behind, do you think?
I think within the context of the care economy, a lot of the African countries are still lagging behind because beyond the policy perspectives, there's a question on the infrastructure for having effective and efficient care economies. So a lot of work still needs to be done beyond the policy perspectives in terms of care infrastructure to ensure that this is really an area that significantly is recognized as a key contributor to the economy.
And Advocate Maluleke, just going on the care economy before I delve into GBV, just speak to us about, what are the policy shifts that you are, advocating for to ensure that unpaid care work is recognized, particularly when you look at those countries, that are lagging behind on the African continent?
I think, first of all, is ensuring that there is access to care support facilities. That's the first one. Secondly, recognizing women's contribution to the country through them providing care work, but also to ensure that it is regulated. There are policies and frameworks that are implemented throughout Africa and throughout the G20 countries, so that women can be entitled to that. You can't just provide those services without developing
And are there
laws.
stringent categories for care work? When we talk about it, what are we exactly looking at?
You can look at things that you take for granted.
Yeah.
You can look at ECDs. You can look at old age homes. You can look at recreational facilities, which most of the people don't refer to, but recreational facilities are for young persons because mothers, more especially, have to look at their children, even those that are 14 years or 15 years and all those. And if you have recreational facilities, they can be able to assist the parents to be able to focus on decent work and others.
I want us to touch on GBV. I mean, when you look at the numbers in South Africa, they're quite staggering. It is, unfortunately, a pandemic. I mean, it's something that we were talking about during the actual COVID-19 pandemic, but it has come, it's a crisis, essentially.
It is.
What are you looking at within these working groups, and what are we likely to see that is tangible in a form of a declaration come November?
First of all, even though we're focusing on eradicating gender-based violence, we're focusing on positive masculinity, so that men take responsibility, men and boys take responsibility also of ending gender-based violence, but also raising a young man to be a responsible young man after. But also we want to share best practices with other countries, because all countries have got gender-based violence, but the extent differs. In South Africa, it's just out of proportion. So how are they doing that? Because some have got your technological facilities that help them. Some they've got training programs. They have different things that make everyone to understand that gender-based violence is, it's not just about prohibition, but it is wrong.
And that's a very important point. But in as far as those stats are concerned, speak to us about, in your view, as a UN Women's organization in South Africa, where are the implementation gaps do you see? And is there room for some form of collaboration, particularly on a global scale?
So there's definitely room for collaboration, but I think I just want to also reinforce or inform yourselves that what is happening globally is that a lot of the focus is on response for gender-based violence and femicide, and what is needed to successfully address issues around gender-based violence and femicide speaks to prevention. And some of the prevention strategies, as DG has rightfully spoken to, revolves around patriarchal masculinities as well as social norms. So once we can successfully address issues around social norms, which have a direct impact on issues around gender-based violence and femicide, then we can begin to really see the needle shifting in terms of what is happening in the context of gender-based violence and femicide, because the policies are there, the justice system is in place, so there's other mechanisms that need to really have, or rather see more concerted efforts towards, rather than just focusing on response. There needs to be more preventative work that's done.
Financial inclusion is also one of those things that I would like to peg also under some form of abuse, you know, and discrimination. Speak to us about, in terms of the work that you do there, what are you seeing particularly where it speaks to gaps on a gender scale when it comes to financial inclusion for women?
So as UN Women, the gaps that we've noted is really around small to medium women-owned micro-enterprises, particularly in rural communities that don't regularly have access to finance, and this is because they might not have a credit history, and that becomes limiting in terms of their ability to apply for credit to grow their respective enterprises. I think it's also important to have that at the forefront, because South Africa is a country that struggles with unemployment, and entrepreneurship can be used as a mechanism to address issues around unemployment. So there really needs to be more efforts around addressing financial inclusion for women and seeing what types of funding models would work best for women in marginalized communities or your rural communities.
Advocate, very quickly, 30 seconds, wrapping with you, in terms of how you are using the G20 summit to push just some of the discussion points that we're talking about now, so that the member countries can really start implementing now, particularly for people that are on the ground.
With the G20, what we are pushing for is the Wi-Fi, which will be launched by the World Bank, because the World Bank has been a partner. But also, we've been working with the banks in South Africa, your financial sector, your DFIs, in order for them to start discussing the issues of de-risking investment in women.
All right, thank you so much to you both. I really do appreciate it as we continue to monitor the working groups. That was Advocate Joyce Maluleke, Director General of the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, as well as the technical lead for the G20 Empowerment Women Working Group, and UN Women South Africa's Program Analyst, Mofokeng. So we've come to the end of the G20 Focus from Beijing +30 to W20's Decade of Action. The commitments are clear, but delivery is what counts. The challenge now is, of course, turning the G20 priorities into measurable change that women can feel in their homes, workplaces, and communities. The question remains, will this momentum finally tip the scales towards a truly equal future? We'll continue to unpack all of these pertinent issues during our coming G20 Focus segments. Until then, it's goodbye for now.